Neighbor cuts down man's tree, ends up paying $1.2 million. When you're living in a neighborhood, it's important to be considerate to your neighbors. After all, you'll be living next to each other for the foreseeable future, so you might as well make the most of it. However, there are some neighbors who don't really like the neighborhood cheer and prefer their issues get solved at the expense of others. But this particular neighbor is going to learn that messing with a bunch of trees would leave him bankrupt. Our story starts with the wonderful couple Michael and Emma, who lived right by Nashville, Tennessee. They'd only just moved and wanted some minor changes to add a bit of personality to their home. After all, there were many homes in the area, and they all looked the same with the trees lining their yard, so they wanted to be a bit more unique. They soon created a flawless garden for their trees, and though the oak trees were absolutely beautiful and the defining feature of their home, they wanted a little less mulberry trees as they were blocking out the sun. But little did they know that this thought would lead them into a ton of trouble. You see, Michael's neighbor had spent a lot of money building a front porch just before Michael and his wife had moved in. It included a fire pit, hanging lights, a jacuzzi, and a pizza oven. There was just one small issue. He'd spend his afternoon in his jacuzzi, but the oak trees around Michael's property would often block out the sun in that exact spot. So he had a request for his new neighbors. He wanted the trees removed and even offered a large amount for it. Michael and his wife loved their oak trees, which gave them privacy from the road and refused to cut them down. But they were fine with a few mulberry trees being removed as that was on their agenda anyway. However, he had no idea what his true neighbor's intentions were. While Michael was out of town, the neighbor said he'd drop a quote off in his mail. Michael knew nothing about cutting trees, so he thanked his neighbor for his time. All of this was new to him, so he appreciated the help. But just 1 week later, Michael was seeing red. He and his wife had just gotten home from their trip to a terrible sight. There were diggers and trucks in his yard, and he saw that it was his neighbor's company logo on the side of them. Then he realized what was going on, as there were already many trees which had been cut down, and not just the ones they'd agreed on, but rather many of the oak trees as well. Michael's heart raced as he busted through the doors and ran down to them, shouting at them to stop. He waved frantically as his voice was drowned out by the loud machinery. One worker saw Michael sprinting toward him and immediately shut off his engine. When he understood what he said, he immediately hopped out and waved at his crew to stop what they were doing. Michael looked around at the devastation and angrily asked him who had given them permission. He replied that they'd been told to chop down these trees by their boss, his neighbor. Michael was furious. His yard was now mashed grass, stomped on flower beds and fallen branches. And amid it all were the barren and sawn-off stumps where his beautiful oaks had once stood. Michael, intensely confused, told the workers he never agreed to any work taking place here. Immediately, the worker rang his boss, Michael's neighbor, and handed him the phone. After a heated, short conversation, they hung up. The workers left his property, and Michael was left with huge fallen trees and debris scattered around his yard. But this was just the beginning. Michael stewed about what to do next, but there was nothing he could do. The trees were gone, callously sewn down to a row of dead stumps, and it would take years before anything grew back. He tried to confront his unbelievable neighbor, but the man was lying low and his phone went straight to voicemail. Then, to add insult to injury, he found a note that his neighbor slid underneath the front door. As soon as he read the note, he was so incensed that he immediately went to Reddit to anonymously look for some advice. When I returned from vacation last week, I came home to 2 tree stumps, mashed up grass, and a letter telling me to expect a Venmo payment for $2,000, Michael angrily explained. His neighbor really thought that throwing money at the problem would make it go away. When Michael's wife came home, she was devastated that her beloved trees were gone, and she hated now being able to see the cars pass on the busy road that was previously hidden behind their old trees. The next day, they wanted to sort this out with their neighbor, but there was a problem. The trees that were cut down and left messily on their land had slid onto the busy road after a night of heavy rainfall. The couple woke up to the cops knocking on their door and was informed that the trees were their responsibility, so they would need to pay for the expense of the city moving these massive trees. However, they quickly explained their situation, and with Michael's wife being a lawyer, she was able to calmly and effectively avoid blame and responsibility for this. But that's when things got interesting. Michael's Reddit post had attracted hundreds of comments in just a few days. Many users were just as stumped as he was, but then one of them advised him to repost his question on another thread called r/treelaw. Without any options left, Michael took their advice and scrolled through that particular thread, only for his eyes to widen in disbelief at what he found. He had no idea that there were actually lawyers who specialized in arboreal arbitration and dealt with the laws concerning trees. Michael immediately posted his situation in the new thread, and all the users immediately told him to get an arborist in ASAP. It turned out Michael could do something about his audacious neighbor after all. After weeks of back and forth and growing annoyance at the loss of their beautiful trees, Michael finally had a plan. The couple ended up hiring an arborist or tree doctor to determine the value of the trees they'd lost as a way to get their neighbor to admit his wrongdoings and pay up. Meanwhile, the Redditors on the r/treelaw Reddit thread waited for an update from Michael with bated breath. I assure you we're all anxiously awaiting how many zeros are in the estimate that the arborist gives you, so you must promise frequent update posts, one user wrote. And when Michael did update them, they were blown away. To the couple's astonishment, their trees were valued at a ridiculously high price, as they were rare oak trees that took hundreds of years to grow. They then hired an attorney and equipped him with all the knowledge they gained from the tree doctor and the overhanging bill left by the council to clean up the road. It was then when the man told them how much they could sue his neighbor's company for, a whopping $1.2 million. The neighbor declared his business bankrupt and shut it down. He sold his house and moved out of town too, while Michael and his wife didn't have to pay a penny. It's gonna take a long time apparently, several months, possibly all the way till September, since the process didn't start until just this week with the holidays, Michael wrote in his update, but I'll have all 12 trees back on my property at no cost to me. I want to thank everyone for all their advice. It was a huge help, he continued. I didn't know you were also into trees, but I'm glad you are. Well, it turns out that the neighbor learned his lesson, and it certainly is true that the internet has an answer to every problem you may face.